Picture this. I am standing in a tiny hut on the edge of a frozen valley. The wind scratches at the walls like a desperate hand. The fire is dying, a red eye closing slowly in its sleep, and in the corner, a woman holds her baby close to the hearth. Her breath fogs in the air, the frost clinging to her lashes like salt. She presses a glowing stone to the child's chest, whispering a prayer I cannot hear. The baby's lips are blue. The stone glows brighter. Outside, the valley moans. Wood cracks. Snow glitters with that cruel, perfect beauty only death can sustain. The woman's hands tremble, but she does not cry. She keeps pressing the light against her child's ribs until, at last, a small, soft sound breaks through the silence, a breath. Now, imagine another world. A sun-drenched palace far to the south, where marble floors remember the desert's heat even after sunset. A queen walks barefoot across them, her feet stained with rose petals and gold dust. Around her, courtiers murmur about trade and wars, but she hears only the hush of sand beyond the walls, that endless, breathing sea. She stops, kneels, and touches the floor. The stone is still warm. She smiles as if the earth itself obeyed her. Two worlds, one ruled by frost, the other by fire. And yet, their survival depends on the same secret. It's strange, isn't it? How warmth, that simplest of mercies, decides who lives and who becomes story. Tonight, I will tell you about both of them. The frozen huts and the golden palaces. The people who built systems to protect their heat and the ones who burned for it. I've spent years chasing these fragments, through libraries and ruins, through dreams that smell of smoke. They say stories begin with heroes. But this one begins with a covenant, an unspoken pact between those who serve and those who rule, both chained to the same need, to keep the fire alive. So, dim your lights. Let your room fall quiet. I'll carry the flame for now. But listen closely, before we are done. You'll feel its breath against your own hands. Good evening, traveler. Before the road opens, make a little room for it. Dim the lights until the furniture grows shy. Let the window turn from a view into a quiet mirror. If there's rain where you are, listen to how it edits the street below. If there's wind, let it drum softly on the glass until you feel the beat under your ribs match it. If you are somewhere busy, train, bus, kitchen, cup one hand around your attention the way you might shelter a match. This is enough. A story only needs that much light to begin. Breathe with me. In through the nose, out through the heart. Again, slower. The breath will not make a sound anyone else can hear, but it will change the temperature of the room. I was taught that long ago in a place where fire had manners and death had timing. The elders there believed that stories are a form of heat. They move, they gather, they make space survivable. I don't know if they were right. I only know that when I speak like this, low, careful, attentive, the dark feels less invested in winning. Imagine the hum of an old hearth. Not the leaping drama of pine, but the steady animal sound of coals doing their patient work. The scent is something like bread that almost remembered to rise, something like wet wool learning the alphabet of smoke. The floor is packed earth or worn wood. Either way, your foot knows it by memory. Your shadow leans and straightens as if it, too, were breathing. Outside, frost tests the doorframe with a fingernail. Inside, the spoons on the table have a small glow to them, because metal knows how to keep secrets warm. I like to think you and I are sitting near that light, not for ceremony but for logistics. Warmth expands the kindest parts of us. It allows the mind to unclench its jaw. So we practice a small liturgy of readiness. Loosen your shoulders as if setting down a pail. Place your phone face down like a closed book. Let the last message you didn't answer cool on the windowsill. The world will wait. It pretends it won't, but it will. Tell me where you are, if only in a whisper the room will keep. A studio lit by a single lamp. A dormitory buzzing with someone else's music. A booth in a late-night restaurant where the waitress has learned your order by heart. A stairwell that smells faintly of dust and apple peel. I collect such small geographies the way others collect coins. Each has its own heat. I will tuck yours into the lining of the story, so that when the cold rises later, there is one more layer between us and it. We are not beginning in a palace. We are beginning in the kind of room where the ceiling remembers the height of your childhood and the door remembers the shape of your back. In rooms like this, silence has function. It lets the fire do the talking and makes a home of listening. There is danger here, yes. Hunger, tired wood, a night that does not forgive mistakes. But there is also a competence built by repetition. You bank coals at dusk, you stir them at dawn. You do not waste, you do not hoard, you do not brag, because bragging leaks heat. When I say, imagine, I am not asking you to leave the present. I am asking you to notice it more exactly. The light you are sitting in, electric, candle, screen, has its own pulse. If you watch it carefully, you will see the old hearth hiding inside it, the ancestor that burned wood and then bone and then stories to keep people talking. We are odd creatures. We survive by turning attention into shelter. In the north where this tale is headed, hospitality is a physics problem. You move warmth from where it is to where it is needed with soup and wool and breath. In the south, hospitality is geometry. Shade drawn across paths, channels cut for wind, stone persuaded to forget noon. Both kinds begin with the same confession: alone, we cool too quickly. So let's agree, for tonight, to be less alone. I'll carry the thread, you keep the knot from slipping. If one of us falters, the other can blow gently on the coal between the words and bring it back. There is nothing mystical about this. It is only craft. It is also everything. Listen. Can you hear the room adjusting to your breath? The air moves differently when a story starts. Machines lower their voices. Pipes remember mountains. Even the chair renegotiates its treaty with your weight. If you are tired, and when are we not, place your palm over your sternum and notice how the warmth collects under your hand. The body, stubborn lantern that it is, keeps swinging even when the hallway is long. Give it permission to be enough. I will not promise comfort. I will promise clarity. We will meet people who confuse kindness with control and others who confuse faith with fire. We will sit beside a woman who can teach a stone to remember heat and beside a queen who tries to cool her own power before it scorches the ones who love her. We will watch a village turn gratitude into law. We will watch a city turn law into ash. We will not hurry. We will not linger cruelly. Where a door closes, we will stand a moment and feel the wood. If fear visits while we travel, let it sit on the edge of the bed and listen, too. It prefers to be consulted. Give it a cup with a crack in the hotter tea. Ask it where it learned the shape of your name. It will answer in weather. When it does, thank it for its diligence and then ask the story to proceed. You do not need to know any gods to join us, only the rules of breath. In through the nose, out through the heart. The first half draws the world inward, the second half returns it warmer than it arrived. That is the oldest algebra I know. The difference between those two halves is what we call meaning. A child in the north will recite this rhythm as a lullaby. A servant in the south will use it to count steps while carrying water across a courtyard that smells of jasmine and heat. A historian in our century will find the instruction written in two scripts and call it syncretic nonsense. Then, when the lights flicker, they will repeat it without meaning to. The body remembers its teachers even when the mind has changed schools. I think of my grandmother now, how she salted stories with gestures. 2 fingers to mean secrecy, the flat palm to caution wind, a circle drawn in ash to invoke a promise. She would have liked you. She would have admired your patience and your unclaimed cup. She would have warned you, gently, that the frost is not the enemy, forgetting is. Then she would have told you to put on thicker socks, because philosophy is nothing without wool. Is the room quiet enough? Not silent, quiet. Silence is brittle and will snap, quiet bends. If it isn't, lower the light a finger's width. Shift the chair so the draft learns new manners. If your back complains, tell it we are transporting gold under our coats and it will straighten for a while out of pride. Soon, we will step into a valley that thinks it knows its future and into a palace that thinks it owns the sun. Between them, A road will braid frost to fire and call the braid devotion. Before we go, look once around your room and memorize how it holds you. The act will do for you later what a pocketful of warm stones once did for travelers, give you a moving hearth. One last preparation. Think of a name you have not said aloud for years. Someone who kept you warm when they didn't have to, or someone you tried to keep warm and failed. Place their name in the air between us. We will carry it to the first scene and hold it close to the flame. Not to fix anything, to honor the physics of care. All right, the lights are as low as they need to be without apologizing. The window has agreed to keep our reflections. The breath knows its arithmetic. I can hear the old hearth humming again, that quiet engine of survival. The story stands by the door, gloved and patient. Come, take your coat if you want, leave it if you trust me. Either way, I'll walk first and test the ice. If it holds, you follow. If it groans, we take another path. That is the only contract worth making between teller and listener. I will not ask you to step where I would not place my own weight. In through the nose, out through the heart. Good, the room is ready. So are we. Before kings learned to stamp their faces on coins, before scholars made laws for how the stars should move, the people of Valmere built their knowledge out of necessity. They didn't call it science. They called it staying alive. Every dawn had a purpose. Fix the thatch before frost turned it brittle, fetch water before the river closed its mouth. Stack wood in a cross pattern so it would breathe instead of suffocate. We were not proud. We were practical. I remember the smell of the village before winter, wet soil, old smoke, and cabbage boiled long enough to forget its name. Life was hard but organized. Even misery had a schedule. We knew when the frost would arrive because the dogs started barking at the river. We knew when it would leave because the crows began to argue again. Between those certainties, there was work, and within work, a kind of peace. Valmere stood between two ridges, a bowl of stone cradling smoke. Houses hunched close together, sharing their walls as animals share body heat. The roofs were low, the doors narrow to keep out the wind's curiosity. Each hearth was a heart. Every family kept a fire, not just for cooking but for proof. Warmth was evidence of belonging. You could tell how a household was doing by how its smoke rose. Steady meant comfort, thin meant hunger, none meant mourning. Children grew up learning to read smoke the way others learned to read letters. They'd point at a distant chimney and say, "They've run out of wood," or, "Their boy has a fever," or, "The old man's died." News traveled not by voice, but by the color of the air. There was rhythm in hardship. When you live with winter long enough, you stop asking for mercy and start making deals. The people of Valmere had a dozen words for cold and none for leisure. They sang while they worked, not for joy but to keep their lungs warm. Songs were woven with instructions: how to tie knots, how to dry fish, how to whisper thanks to the frost for sparing the newborns. Our religion was repetition. We had gods, of course, but they were quiet ones. Elandra was the name we gave to warmth itself. She wasn't a woman or a creature, just the promise that heat would return if we remembered the right gestures. Her temples were our kitchens, her offerings were the logs we split. She didn't demand sacrifice, she demanded attention. My earliest memory of devotion wasn't prayer. It was my mother teaching me to lay kindling in the right order. Thin to thick, dry to damp, hope to certainty. Never rush the spark, she said. It hates impatience. Once a year, when the rivers began to freeze, we held the ceremony of smoke. Every hearth in the village was allowed to go dark for 1 hour. Then, at the strike of a bell, we relit them all from the same flame carried from house to house. The light passed along the road like a thought. People said the village breathed as one body that night. I used to think it was beautiful. Later I would see how easily beauty becomes control. For now, though, it was innocence. The men chopped wood in pairs so no one froze alone. The women spun wool and sang to their spindles. Even the wind had manners, it knocked before entering. The oldest among us sat by the fire and told stories about the first settlers who came here chasing refuge from war. They said the valley was cursed, but that curse kept outsiders away. The frost was our border, the mountains our walls, the snow our silence. We had no gold, no armies, nothing anyone else wanted. That was our strength. The world forgot us, and in forgetting, left us peace. Some nights I think about that peace and realize it was a thin disguise for stagnation. We mistook predictability for safety. We thought the frost was fair because it came to everyone. We didn't see how easily fairness can turn to indifference. Still, it's important to remember, before everything changed, Valmere worked. The system held. There were patterns that made sense. The frost came, the frost went. The children grew, the elders died. The earth kept its word. On summer nights when the sun barely set, we'd gather outside to tell stories. My favorite was of the stranger made of embers who once walked across the valley in a cloak of smoke. He carried fire in his bare hands but never burned. He'll come again, the old one said, when the frost forgets mercy. I used to imagine him watching from the hills, waiting for us to need him. I didn't believe it then. I do now, because the frost did forget. It began subtly, the way all disasters do, too little to notice, too much to stop once you did. The birds left early that year. The river thickened before the last harvest was done. Apples froze on branches, turning from red to white overnight. The ground, usually generous until mid-autumn, hardened beneath our boots. We laughed at first. The elders said the seasons were playing tricks. But laughter doesn't boil water. When the frost took the first house, we thought it was accident. The chimney had cracked, letting in wind. They rebuilt it with thicker stone. The next week, 3 more hearths died. The smoke stopped rising. You could smell the cold before you felt it, the way iron smells before a storm. By the time we realized this winter had no patience, it was too late to prepare. People say fear is loud. It isn't. Fear whispers, and it whispers in routine. We kept doing what we'd always done, hoping habit could bribe the weather. We sang the same songs, stacked the same logs, whispered to the same goddess. But Elondra didn't answer that year. Or perhaps she did, and her answer was frost. I still remember the night the rules changed. I was a child lying beside the hearth, my face warm, my back cold. The flames kept shrinking though my mother fed them wood. She frowned, reached for her shawl, and said, "It's too early." Outside, the dogs had stopped barking. Even the wind had gone still. That's when we heard it, a soft crack, like ice sighing. Then another. Then hundreds, the sound rolling across the valley like bones under snow. By morning, every river was sealed in glass. We called it the first silence. After that, every day was negotiation. People traded salt for wood, stories for warmth. We learned how far the body could go before it shivered too hard to hold tools. Children stopped playing outside. Mothers began sewing pockets into coats to hide stones heated in the oven. The frost crawled under doors, through walls, through memory. We prayed. We begged. We built fires so tall they turned the sky black. And when the smoke finally disappeared, when even the air felt too brittle to breathe, a stranger arrived. He came walking through the valley as if the frost had paved him a road. His cloak was made of something that shimmered, neither fabric nor flame. He carried a small pouch that glowed faintly blue. I watched from the doorway as he knelt before our dying fire. Without a word, he reached into his pouch and threw a handful of dust into the ashes. The flames leapt up like they had remembered their purpose. No one spoke. No one dared. By dawn, he was gone. No trail, no scent, only footprints that melted back into snow. We searched for him for years. Some said he was an angel. Others, a ghost. My mother said he was simply a man who understood warmth better than we did. Whichever he was, he left behind a lesson we never forgot. When the world decides to freeze, salvation comes in sparks too small to notice at first. That was the night Valmere stopped trusting the rules of nature and began building its own. That winter came too soon, and when it came, it refused to leave. It arrived like an animal that had forgotten how to sleep. The frost crawled down from the mountains weeks before the harvest was finished, sealing the rivers with a thin, glass-like skin. It looked beautiful from a distance, clean, quiet, mercifully still. But anyone who tried to break through that surface found the cold beneath waiting like a predator. At first, we told ourselves it was an early season, nothing more. The elders said, "We've seen worse," and for a few days, belief made it true. We wrapped the trees in cloth, packed the roots with ash, hung jars of oil near the door to keep them from freezing. The frost watched patiently. It always does. Then it began to eat sideways, into the cellars, the wells, the walls themselves. The first sign was the bread. Bread had always been our measure of balance. When the dough refused to rise, the village knew something deeper was failing. My mother whispered, "The air has turned heavy. It's tired." Within a week, milk curdled before morning. Fish died under the ice, bellies white as moons. The old songs about endurance stopped sounding brave and started sounding like denial. We kept working. We always did. The men swung axes, trying to split wood hard enough to spark. The women boiled snow, pretending it was soup. Children stopped crying because crying wasted heat. Even the dogs changed. They slept in the ashes, their breath slow and uncertain. I remember one night when the fire dimmed to a thin red line, and my mother pressed her hands together as if praying, but instead of words she blew gently into the coals, whispering to them like a lover. It worked for a while. Then one by one, fires began to die. Smoke disappeared from the chimneys. The air smelled empty, as if something had been erased. Families huddled together, pressing bodies into one shape, hoping skin could replace fire. The goddess Elandra was invoked in every corner, her name written on the doors with soot. People carried bowls of ash like talismans. Still, the cold deepened. It was not weather anymore, it was verdict. Despair doesn't shout in Valmere. It whispers like frost through cracks. I remember the silence after the last fire in the square went out. You could hear the snow settling on roofs, a sound like breathing turned inward. The moon rose, clear and merciless. Somewhere, someone began to pray. Another voice joined, then another, until the entire valley hummed like a hive of fear. That was when he arrived. I didn't see him come. No one did. One moment the night was empty. The next, a shape stood at the edge of the village, cloaked in shadow. He moved like someone who had studied silence long enough to master it. When he reached our door, the wind followed him in but stopped short, as if unsure who was in charge. His eyes glowed faintly, not from reflection but from within, a red-orange pulse like embers buried under ash. He didn't speak at first. My mother, never one to fear a man who entered without knocking, met his gaze. "Are you lost?" she asked. He tilted his head, studying the dying hearth behind her. Then he reached into his cloak and pulled out a small pouch. When he opened it, the air shimmered. Inside was dust. No, not dust, but something alive, shifting between blue and gold. He took a pinch between his fingers, knelt, and scattered it over the cold ashes. The room filled with light, not the yellow of normal fire but something purer, deeper. The logs caught as if they had been waiting for his permission. The warmth spread through the walls, the floor, our bones. I remember gasping, not because it burned, but because it didn't. It was perfect. He stood, nodded once to my mother, and walked out without another word. The snow swallowed his shape before the door could close. We searched for him at dawn. The only proof he had been real were the footprints outside, each one melted into small puddles that steamed even in the cold. For weeks after, the fire he revived refused to die. Even when left untended, the embers glowed beneath the ash, stubborn and alive. We called it a blessing, though some whispered other words: experiment, omen, curse. It didn't matter. The frost retreated, but the rules had changed. The priests were the first to claim him. Elandra walks among us, they said. She has sent her servant. The council agreed, because agreeing was safer than thinking. They built a small altar in the center of the village, burning wood from every house to mix their luck. The smoke rose in a perfect column, blue at the base, gold at the tip. Balance, the elders said. The goddess is pleased, but not everyone was pleased. I overheard my mother telling the miller, no divine being needs tools. Whoever he was, he learned this. The miller frowned. Then he should have stayed. She looked into the fire, her eyes catching the light. People like that never stay. They only leave instructions. We waited for his return. We kept the fires alive, watching for signs. Some villagers claimed to see him in dreams. Others claimed their hearts whispered in his voice. Children played at being the Ember Man, throwing handfuls of flour into the air and shouting spells. For the first time in months, people laughed. Then the harvest failed entirely. The frost returned stronger, sharper, less forgiving. The river froze so hard the ice cracked the stones beneath. Smoke vanished again, but this time, our fires did not die. They dimmed, yes, but they endured. We found that if you buried a live ember in ash overnight, it would survive till morning. The trick spread quickly, passed from door to door. The stranger's miracle had turned into method. My mother said, that's how the world changes. Someone arrives, reminds us we were wrong, and disappears before we start asking questions. The next months were a fever of invention. We learned to carry small stones warmed in the oven from house to house. Children became messengers of heat. People traded glowing embers the way others trade coins. The system worked, no one froze. We called it survival, though some began to call it faith. I remember one night when the elders debated whether to name this new practice. It needs a title, said the blacksmith, else we forget who taught us. My mother laughed softly. Names don't preserve things, she said. They trap them, but they named it anyway. Elandra's gift. Soon it had rules. Rules became rituals. Rituals became hierarchy. We learned that nothing spreads faster than comfort disguised as holiness. Still, I can't forget that first night. The way the fire came back to life. The way my mother's hands glowed in its light. I didn't yet understand that miracles are rarely free. When I dream now, I sometimes see him again. The stranger kneeling before a dying hearth, scattering his impossible dust. But in the dream, I noticed something we missed that night. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from exhaustion. As though he'd done this too many times before, in too many villages that forgot him afterward. Maybe he wasn't sent by any goddess. Maybe he was simply a man who understood that survival is always borrowed. That warmth, like mercy, must be carried from one person to the next or it dies. Whatever he was, that winter ended the world we thought we understood. When the frost came again, we were ready for it. Or so we believed. After the stranger vanished, the people of Valmere did what all frightened people do when they meet a miracle. They tried to repeat it. Repetition is comfort, and comfort is control. By spring, every household had buried embers under ash before sleep, whispering the words "stay until they wake." At first, it was practical, nothing more. A way to keep the coals alive through the long nights. But soon it became ritual. And ritual, given enough repetition, becomes law. The elders met in the square to discuss preservation. Fire has memory, said the miller. Ash is the bed where it dreams. Someone nodded. Someone wrote it down. That's how scripture begins, as good advice that outlives its author. Within months, Valmere had rules for heat, the first in human memory. The council declared that no family could let its hearth die. To let a flame go cold, they said, is to break faith with Elandra. Those who managed to keep their embers burning were rewarded with honor. Those who failed were quietly pitied. Before long, pity turned to suspicion. To maintain fairness, they created a new role, the ashkeeper. Families chosen for their reliability were entrusted to monitor fires throughout the valley. Each keeper carried a woven pouch lined with fur, designed to hold warm stones and glowing coals. At dusk, they walked door to door, checking hearths, trading embers when necessary, ensuring no household was left in darkness. The villagers praised them, brought them food, gave them blankets. They carry the goddess's breath, people said. Their steps keep the frost away. But warmth, once measured, becomes currency. The keepers began keeping records. Lists of who borrowed fire, who gave, who failed. Marks on bark became tablets of ash. Tablets became ledgers. They called it efficiency. I call it the beginning of control. Each week, the council gathered to inspect the ledgers. A house with strong flame was labeled faithful. Weak flame, negligent. No flame, forsaken. And so heat, the most basic of mercies, became a system of judgment. My mother, Mira, was among the first keepers. She was chosen because she never allowed her fire to die, not even once. People admired her skill but feared her independence. She believed warmth was a partnership, not a gift. The fire works as hard as you do, she told me. Neglect is colder than snow. She carried her pouch across the valley, face soot-streaked, eyes bright, distributing coals like blessings. At night, she taught me the breath pattern of warmth. In through the nose, she whispered, out through the heart. The fire listens to rhythm. I was small enough to believe that the hearth understood language. I still wonder if she did too. Children learned the pattern before they could read. In schools, small, smoky huts with slate floors, teachers drilled it into them as both exercise and prayer. Breathe for the fire, they said. Let it borrow your heat. The children giggled, turning breath into play, unaware they were rehearsing obedience. By the third winter, the system had grown elegant. Every dawn, a bell rang through Valmere. Smoke rose from each chimney in sequence, timed to the hour, as if the whole valley were a single machine. Strangers passing through at night called it a miracle. The sky stitched with plumes of gray, glowing faintly in the moonlight. They didn't see the anxiety beneath the beauty. Each family feared being the one whose smoke failed. Soon, competition replaced cooperation. Our fire burns longer, boasted one farmer. Our coals stay red till morning. To prove devotion, people began adding offerings to their hearths. Dried herbs, pieces of old clothing, even carved figures of wood. The scent of burning cedar and wool became Valmere's perfume. But devotion, when measured, always becomes performance. The keepers noticed. Some began charging favors for strong embers. We carried your warmth last winter, they'd remind a neighbor. You owe us now. Others started embellishing their ledgers, erasing debts, recording imaginary flames to please the council. When systems of faith meet systems of power, truth burns first. To organize it all, the elders declared a festival, the Night of Ashes. Once every moon cycle, villagers brought small bowls of cooled ash from their hearths to the square. The keepers collected them into a great mound, then poured oil and set it alight. The flames rose blue, casting halos on the watchers' faces. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. Children danced around the pyre, singing the old chant, in through the nose, out through the heart. The council called it purification. My mother called it bookkeeping disguised as worship. Still, the ritual worked. The fires stayed alive. The frost, for the first time in living memory, failed to claim a single life. Gratitude kept doubt at bay. But systems that begin in gratitude rarely stay that way. As seasons passed, the keepers grew rich in trust. They were invited to settle disputes, to bless marriages, to advise births. Their authority expanded quietly, as warmth does, first unnoticed, then undeniable. The council deferred to them on matters of fire and spirit alike. The line between religion and survival dissolved. Heat is moral, the priests began to say. Pure hearts burn steady. It was an easy metaphor, irresistible in its simplicity. The guilty shivered, the virtuous glowed. You could tell someone's soul by their temperature. People began to watch each other's breath, gauging fog in the air as proof of sin or piety. Children teased one another, cold lungs. Elandra's forgotten you. What began as play turned to doctrine. My mother resisted in her quiet way. When the high keeper came to inspect our hearth, she bowed but did not recite the prayer. Faith needs no supervision, she told him. He frowned. Even warmth must report to the flame. She smiled, not unkindly. And who reports to the frost? He left without answering, but the next day, our name appeared in the ledger under temperate. Neither faithful nor negligent, suspended, ambiguous, watched. After that, fewer neighbors visited. Some stopped greeting her altogether. I asked why. She shrugged. People fear what doesn't fit their measure. That night, she added an extra log to the fire. We'll stay warm our own way, she said. The keepers introduced new symbols to maintain control. Patterns burned into wood above each door. Spirals for devotion, straight lines for diligence, circles for repentance. The markings glowed faintly when heated, revealing who had honored the rituals. When the marks faded, the keepers came with torches to renew them. Valmere became a gallery of compliance, each home a certified unit of faith. In time, no one remembered the stranger. The story changed. He became Elandra's messenger, her divine proof. The handful of dust he carried became myth, holy ash, essence of life. The council minted small tokens with his likeness, a faceless figure holding flame. People wore them around their necks, convinced the metal radiated warmth. My mother said, "Faith that requires tools forgets its purpose." She continued her rounds quietly, refusing payment, refusing status. Some called her stubborn, others called her heretic. She didn't mind either. If warmth is divine, she said, then every spark is a prayer. She was right, but no one was listening. They were too busy tending the system that now tended them. By the 10th winter, Valmere glowed from the mountains like a constellation, perfect, ordered, obedient. The frost no longer frightened us. The fires never died. Children no longer remembered what true cold felt like. That should have been victory. Instead, it was dependence. We had learned to worship the symptom instead of the cause. In the stranger's absence, we built a religion not of mercy but of maintenance. The keepers became priests. The villagers became customers. The goddess Elandra, once a whisper in the hearth smoke, was now a bureaucracy with ledgers and seals. When I look back, I realize we did survive, but we also stopped evolving. The frost had taught us fear, and fear taught us obedience. The fires that once symbolized freedom now marked our cages. We believed we'd mastered warmth. In truth, it had mastered us. And still, my mother kept tending her fire by hand, refusing the keeper's coal, refusing the prayers. Faith that needs permission, she said, is already cold. Among the ashkeepers, my mother was both admired and distrusted. She healed more burns and frost wounds than anyone in Valmere, yet the priests whispered that she lacked reverence. She treats warmth like a tool, they said. Not a blessing. They weren't wrong. She did treat it like a tool, one that saved lives, not souls. And perhaps that was her heresy. She used fire for comfort, not control. Our hut stood at the far edge of the village, half hidden by the birch trees that marked the border between settlement and wilderness. It was small, walls patched with mud, smoke curling lazily through the roof vent, but it always smelled of life. Herbs hung from the beams, sage for healing, juniper for protection, meant to trick the frost into thinking it had already bitten. The hearth dominated everything. It wasn't a piece of furniture, it was the axis around which the world spun. When I was a child, I watched my mother work. She could read flame the way others read letters. A flicker to the left meant the wind would turn. A burst of sparks meant someone nearby was ill. She said heat carried language if you listened properly. Her patients believed her because they had no choice. When she pressed warm stones to their skin, the color returned to their faces. She didn't chant, she observed. Fire responds to breath, not belief, she told them. Breathe steady, and it will follow. The keepers called her the listener. It was not a compliment. They preferred people who obeyed, not people who interpreted. My mother had no patience for hierarchy. A good flame doesn't ask who lit it, she'd mutter whenever the high keeper's name came up. When the council issued new decrees, longer prayers, stricter breath patterns, taxes on ash, she laughed softly and ignored them. Faith should not require receipts. Still, she performed her duties. Each evening she carried embers from dying hearths to those too weak to rekindle their own. She moved through the village like a phantom of warmth, her satchel glowing faintly against her hip. Children trailed behind her, trying to catch the sparks that drifted from the pouch. Sometimes she'd pause, let one land on her palm, and hold it until it cooled. "See," she'd whisper, "even fire likes to rest." That quiet defiance made her dangerous. The council watched her with polite suspicion. The High Keeper visited once, pretending concern. "You are beloved, Mira," he said, "but beloved things must be careful. Too much independence burns the pattern." She offered him tea and said nothing. When he left, she stared into the fire for a long time. "When men talk about patterns," she said at last, "they mean cages." She never taught me to pray, only to observe. She made me stand by the hearth each morning, hand on my chest, counting my breath until I could feel my pulse sync with the rhythm of the flame. "Remember," she'd say, "warmth isn't owned, it's shared. It moves through you, not from you." I repeated those words as though they were scripture. Maybe they were. But even she couldn't foresee what would happen next. The year I turned 7, the frost returned harder than ever. We called it the long silence. For weeks the air refused to move. Smoke hung in place, drifting sideways like memory. The fires burned lower no matter how much wood we fed them. People grew frantic. They accused each other of stealing warmth. The council ordered constant inspections. Keepers knocked at every door, testing embers, recording failures. Those found wanting were fined or shamed publicly. Fear, disguised as piety, spread faster than the cold. My mother kept calm. "The frost isn't angry," she said. "It's confused." She began experimenting, mixing ash with salt, grinding emberstone into powder, studying the way heat crawled through metal. She treated it like illness: diagnose, test, adjust. When the priests heard, they accused her of tampering with divine order. She ignored them. "If the goddess forbids curiosity," she told me, "then she's afraid of competition." One night, a desperate farmer brought his infant to our door. The child's lips were blue, its tiny fists stiff with cold. "Please," the man whispered, "they say you can speak to fire." My mother took the baby without a word, pressed a heated stone to its chest, and breathed in the old rhythm: in through the nose, out through the heart. The child coughed, then cried, hoarse, living, miraculous. By morning, the story had spread. They called it Elandra's touch, though my mother never invoked the goddess once. People brought offerings to our doorstep: bread, wool, carved charms of gratitude. She accepted none. "Faith is not barter," she said, sweeping the gifts aside. "Keep your warmth for yourselves." The High Keeper didn't see it that way. To him, a healer outside the system was an infection. "If her methods are holy," he told the council, "then our authority melts." They summoned her for questioning, accusing her of blasphemy. She went willingly, carrying her satchel of embers as if daring them to look inside. No one knows what was said in that meeting. Only that she returned with eyes darker than before and hands trembling faintly, as if the frost had touched them from within. That winter ended with her hut in flames. It happened on the longest night of the year, when the entire village was gathered for the festival of ashes. I was home, half asleep by the hearth. The air tasted strange, sweet, metallic. Then the light changed. The fire flared blue, brighter than I'd ever seen. The walls began to sweat heat. My mother burst through the door, shouting for me to run. She grabbed her scrolls, her herbs, her satchel, everything she could, and threw them toward the window. The smoke thickened. I remember her face glowing orange, the reflection of fire dancing in her eyes. She looked neither afraid nor angry, only certain. She pushed me outside, pressing a warm stone into my palm. "Keep what I've kindled," she said. The words were calm, almost gentle. I wanted to scream, to drag her out, but she turned back into the inferno. The roof collapsed a moment later. By morning, nothing remained but a circle of ash. The snow around it had melted into a perfect ring of mud, steaming against the cold air. There were no bones. No tools. Only a faint smell of herbs and something else, ozone, like the air before lightning. The priests called it divine reclamation. The goddess has taken her servant, they proclaimed. People nodded because nodding is easier than doubt. Some wept, some whispered. No one looked at me directly. The high keeper came to offer condolences. She was chosen, he said. Her fire burns now in the eternal hearth. I stared at his hands, clean and pale, and wanted to shove him into the ashes. Instead, I closed my fist around the stone she'd given me. It was still warm. The council seized what remained, her notes, her tools, her ash, declaring them sacred relics. They burned the scrolls in the square, claiming her knowledge would rise to join the goddess. The people cheered. I remember thinking how quickly gratitude turns into fear, and fear into obedience. That night, I buried the stone beneath the floorboards. I didn't know it then, but it would carry me farther than any map. Weeks later, traders from the south passed through Valmere. They came with goods of copper and salt, their faces bronzed by sun instead of frost. One woman noticed the pendant I wore, the same stone, now dulled to gray, and gasped. Maris, she whispered in her language. Keeper of balance. She touched her heart, then her lips, then mine. The next morning, the traders left. I went with them. The council didn't stop me. Perhaps they thought sending away Myra's daughter would erase her shadow. Perhaps they were right. As the caravan moved beyond the mountains, I turned once to look back. The valley shimmered beneath a sheet of snow, every chimney trailing smoke in perfect, obedient rhythm. From that distance, it looked peaceful, almost holy. But I knew better. I'd lived inside that beauty. I knew how much control it took to keep it alive. Ahead lay Setham, a kingdom of heat and color, a place that had never seen frost. I carried my mother's teachings in my chest like contraband. Breath steady, heart warm. Fire does not ask who it warms. I was 12 years old. And though I didn't know it yet, the warmth I carried would ignite another world. Setham was another world, and I learned it first through the soles of my feet. The sand there did not bite like frost, it hummed, alive with trapped heat. The air was an animal too, a lazy, drowsy creature that wrapped itself around your neck and refused to let go. For days I could not sleep. The nights were too bright, the stars too loud. I had spent my life listening to wood crackle, snow groan, wind whisper through chinks in the wall. In Setham, everything sang. The traders who had taken me called me Northling. They meant no cruelty, it was simply what I was. My pale skin drew stares. My hair, the color of ash, looked strange beside their sun-gilded braids. I kept my head down and my hands busy, polishing copper, carrying water, learning their words. The desert tongue was dry and sharp, built for command. It lacked the softness of the northern dialect where every phrase was a form of weather. Still, language is just another fire. Fed correctly, it glows. Within months, I could bargain, joke, even curse. Setham's capital was a mirage made permanent. White walls rose from the sand, veined with blue marble that caught the sun and fractured it into pieces. Palm trees swayed above wide courtyards, their leaves whispering gossip to the wind. The air smelled of dates, oil, and dust. I had never known a place so alive. It frightened me. Life in Valmere had been measured in degrees of stillness. Here, everything moved, shimmered, changed shape with each breath. The palace was its own city. Servants moved like currents of air, each knowing the precise path between silence and duty. I began as a water girl, carrying jars through endless corridors. The stone floors burned my feet at first. I learned to step lightly, to time my movements with the rhythm of the shade cast by the arches. Within weeks I could cross a courtyard without blistering. The sand trains those who listen, one of the older servants told me. It punishes the ones who rush. The queen was not what I expected. I first saw her from a distance, barefoot, walking across marble that still radiated the day's heat. She was younger than the priests who trailed behind her, yet they bowed as though gravity itself had bent. Her name was Safra. They said she had been chosen by the Oracle of Maris, the ancient city swallowed by dunes long before her birth. Some said she spoke to the spirits of the desert. Others said she simply listened better than most. One evening, I was ordered to deliver water to the royal library. It was not truly a library, more a temple of memory. Scrolls lined the walls from floor to ceiling, some so brittle that touching them was considered a sin. The air smelled of myrrh and sand, a dry sweetness that reminded me of burnt cedar. I remember thinking that this was what eternity must smell like, preserved decay. As I entered, I saw the queen bent over a table, studying a map. Her hair was bound with thin cords of gold, her shoulders bare. She looked up when I poured the water. "You're not from here," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. "No, my queen. Where is your fire from?" she asked, gesturing to the pendant at my neck. I froze. The stone, my mother's stone, had darkened further, nearly black now, but it still held a faint warmth. "It's from the north," I said. "A place of frost." She smiled, not unkindly. "Then you understand balance." I didn't yet, but I wanted to. In the months that followed, she summoned me often, first for errands, then for conversation. She asked about Valmere, about frost, about the sound of snow. I told her what I remembered, the silence between breaths, the way light behaved differently in cold. She listened like a scholar, eyes half closed, as though translating my words into another language inside her mind. The North, she mused once, teaches patience. The South teaches endurance. Both mistake themselves for wisdom. It was she who introduced me to the writings of the servant queens of Maris. The scrolls were ancient, ink faded to dust, but the ideas pulsed with life. They spoke of women who ruled not by decree but by listening, who balanced the heat of the sun with the cool of underground springs, ensuring neither domination nor drought. They believed, Saffred told me, that a ruler must breathe in rhythm with her people. When she forgot, the desert reminded her. Those words struck something deep in me, something that had been sleeping since Valmere. Breath, rhythm, heat, it was the same language, translated into a new climate. I began to study under her scribes, copying scrolls, learning to read the script of the ancients. I discovered that the priests of Maris had believed warmth was not a gift from gods but a conversation between opposites, light and shadow, motion and stillness, power and submission. It was neither mercy nor punishment, it was dialogue. I told Saffra of my mother, of her rebellion against the keepers, of how she taught warmth as craft, not faith. The queen listened intently. "Your mother understood what most monarchs forget," she said. "That power and service are the same motion, seen from opposite sides." Under her mentorship, I changed. I stopped fearing my difference. My gray eyes, my pale skin. Here, they were not deformities but curiosities. The queen called me her mirror servant. "You reflect the world back to itself," she said. "That is rarer than loyalty." The palace whispered. Servants muttered that I carried frost under my tongue, that my shadow cooled the ground. The priests called me the pale omen. None of it mattered. I had purpose again. I tended the royal fires, blending my northern knowledge with southern ritual. I learned how to temper the desert's fury, how to cool stone without quenching flame. Soon, even the scholars consulted me. Yet knowledge in any age carries a shadow. The priests of Setham believed heat was divine essence, the blood of the sun god Arian. To them, my talk of balance, of coolness as virtue, was heresy. They saw my influence over the queen and grew uneasy. One night, as I worked in the library, I found a scroll misfiled among the records of Maris. Its title was written in two scripts, Northern and Desert, and though the parchment was old, the ink was strangely familiar. My pulse quickened. The text spoke of Elandra, the goddess of warmth from my homeland, but here she was called Alnara, she who breathes both ways. The writer described the same ritual my mother had practiced, burying embers under ash, exchanging stones among households. But the scroll was centuries older than Valmere itself. I realized, trembling, that my people had not invented their rituals. They had inherited them, from the south. The fire we had worshipped as miracle was merely memory, returning home in another form. When I told Safra, she closed her eyes, whispering something too soft to hear. At last she said, "So the desert and the frost share one heart. Then let them beat together again." She commissioned new studies, inviting northern traders to bring tales of the cold. She ordered altars built in both sun and shade, one for heat, one for rest. The priests protested. "The sun has no equal," they cried. "To honor the cold is to dishonor Arian." But the queen only smiled. Then the sun should not fear its reflection. Her defiance rippled through the kingdom. Scholars debated the unity of opposites. Artisans forged twin symbols. The flame entwined with the spiral of frost. The people called it the breath of Maris. For a time, the city glowed with curiosity. Balance became fashion. Even prayers ended with a bow to both directions of the wind. I should have known peace like that never lasts. The more the queen listened to me, the more the priests accused her of betrayal. They said I whispered foreign spells into her ear, that my northern blood chilled the divine fire. "A servant cannot teach a queen," one declared in the council hall. Safra replied, "Then you have misunderstood service." Her words traveled faster than wind. Within weeks, I was both famous and hated. Merchants sought me for advice on preserving grain in the heat. Nobles sent gifts wrapped in silk. Yet behind every smile was fear. I had become what my mother once was, a necessary danger. I began to dream of her again, Mira, standing in her burning hut, her eyes bright and calm. In the dream, she whispered, "Fire does not ask who it warms." I would wake sweating, the air around me heavy with the scent of ash. The queen said it was a sign. "Perhaps your goddess speaks through mine," she said. Perhaps they were always the same. But the priests were sharpening their knives in the shadows. I did not yet know how swiftly devotion can turn to accusation, or how warmth, shared too freely, burns the hands that offer it. For now, I let myself believe in balance. I let myself think the world could learn to breathe as one. And that belief, like every flame, was already running out of air. Knowledge burns differently than fire. It doesn't destroy the body, it hollows the air around it, until everything that cannot withstand clarity turns to smoke. That was what happened in Sethem. Our pursuit of balance, of understanding, of warmth shared freely. Those things ignited the city's heart more thoroughly than any rebellion could. And in time, as always, those who thrived on fear began to smell danger in the light. At first, it began with whispers. The queen no longer prays to the sun, the priests murmured in the marketplaces. She consults the northern girl instead. The phrase northern girl became curse and fascination at once. They said I brought frost into the palace, that my shadow made lamps dim, that the queen's laughter had grown quieter since I came. Servants stopped meeting my eyes. The water-bearers crossed themselves when I passed. It was not hatred at first, just unease, the slow rearrangement of superstition into truth. The priests of Arian held power the way desert holds water, by hoarding it. For centuries they had been the interpreters of light. Every birth, every death, every marriage required their blessing. Their god, they said, was a jealous sun, his favor scarce as rain. But the queen's new order threatened all that. To suggest that coolness had its own holiness, that stillness might be divine, this was treason by another name. They began to stage their sermons around me. "Beware the shadow that calls itself balance," preached the high priest Aram. "It seeks not peace, but parity. And parity is death to devotion." His words rolled like thunder over the crowds. People nodded because it felt good to have an enemy. It always does. The queen defended me publicly at first. "She is a student, not a threat," she said before the council. Her homeland honors heat as much as we do, only with different songs. Her calm infuriated them. A ruler who doesn't tremble confuses those who trade in fear. That night, I dreamt of Mira again. My mother's hands covered in ash, her lips forming a warning I couldn't hear. When I woke, the stone around my neck was cold for the first time in years. Soon after, the king returned. Arian, warrior, conqueror, husband, had spent 3 years expanding the empire's borders. His arrival should have been triumphant, trumpets, processions, banners. Instead, the court greeted him with murmurs of heresy. Your wife, they told him, has replaced worship with witchcraft. She kneels beside the frost-born girl, performing strange rituals of dual flame. At first, he laughed. My Saphra has always been curious, he said. She plays with philosophy. But the priests persisted. They showed him drawings, exaggerated sketches of our altars, where flame and cool stones shared the same bowl. They quoted fragments of my writings, twisting them until they sounded like rebellion. Fire is dialogue, I had written. To silence one side is to extinguish the other. In their mouths, it became, to silence the gods. Rumor travels faster than fact because it requires less oxygen. By the time I saw the king again, his smile had changed. He summoned me privately. The chamber was dark, lit only by the reflection of moonlight on bronze. He poured wine and said, "They tell me you are teaching my wife to cool the sun." I bowed, only to listen between its breaths, Majesty. Between its breaths, he repeated softly. That sounds like stopping it. I realized then that he was not angry, he was afraid. Power that depends on worship cannot afford nuance. You think she loves you, he said. But you are only a mirror, and mirrors eventually break. For a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he laughed again, that brittle laugh men use to hide despair. You know what the priests say about the cold? No, that it does not kill by force. It waits for things to stop moving. And that is what you do. You make things still. He dismissed me with a wave, but the next morning, guards began following me through the halls. The queen refused to bend. She continued her studies, expanding our experiments. We mixed northern ash with desert sand, creating a new glass that captured both heat and light without shattering. The artisans called it the breathstone. Its glow was softer than fire, cooler than moonlight. It became the queen's symbol, a vessel that held two truths at once. That was her mistake. Symbols are weapons, and ours cut too beautifully. Within weeks, nobles began gifting one another small shards of breathstone, claiming it blessed marriages and kept tempers calm. The priests countered by calling it cursed glass. They said it trapped the souls of the faithful. When several shipments mysteriously caught fire on the road, I knew the balance had tipped. Then the famine came. A year of poor rain turned the outer provinces barren. The priests seized the moment. The sun withdraws his favor, they cried. He hides his face from those who honor shadow. They organized processions, demanded sacrifices, and blamed me for the drought. The frost-born has poisoned the sky, they chanted in the squares. She draws heat from the hearts of men. The king, desperate to restore order, ordered an inquiry. Let the council decide her fate, he said. I was not surprised. Power always delegates cruelty. The trial took place in the Great Hall, its walls painted with scenes of conquest. Hundreds gathered, priests, nobles, servants. The queen stood beside me, her hand resting on mine. You are not alone, she whispered. But I was. A servant accused is never anything else. The high priest began. Liana of Valmere, he said, using the name I had almost forgotten. You stand accused of heresy, sorcery, and seduction of the crown. You have corrupted the queen and defiled the worship of Arian by introducing foreign practices of dual worship. How do you plead? I looked at the assembled faces, some hateful, some merely curious. I do not plead, I said. Fire does not ask who it warms. The hall erupted. Some gasped, others shouted. The priests took it as confession. She admits it, they cried. She denies the order of the sun. The queen stepped forward, defiant. You twist her words. Balance is not denial, it is comprehension. But the council had already decided. Fear had outvoted truth long before I entered the room. By decree, I was stripped of all titles, forbidden from the palace, and ordered to return to the north, from whence the frost came. The queen protested until they threatened her throne. "If you defend her," said the high priest, "you share her blasphemy." That night, Saphra came to my quarters. She had dismissed her guards and carried only a small lamp. "They will come for you at dawn," she said. "You must leave before then." She pressed something into my hand, a shard of breathstone, glowing faintly between blue and gold. "Take this. It remembers both warmth and coolness. Like you. I won't run," I said. "Then I will." She kissed my forehead and left. When the guards came at sunrise, her chambers were empty. Only a faint scent of myrrh and smoke remained. They searched for weeks. Some said she had fled into the desert. Others whispered she had walked into the sun itself. The priests declared her death a sign of divine judgment. The king withdrew from public life. The temples grew rich again. The breathstones were outlawed, melted down, forgotten. I left quietly, as exiles do. The shard she gave me stayed warm against my chest no matter how cold the nights grew. I crossed dunes and mountains, retracing the path that had once carried me south. Every fire I saw along the way looked familiar, as if I'd left it burning years before. When I reached the valley of Valmere, the huts were gone. The frost had reclaimed them, smooth as glass. I knelt where my mother's hearth once stood and buried the shard in the snow. The earth hissed as if remembering language. I whispered the breath pattern, in through the nose, out through the heart. The warmth spread, just a little, enough to see my reflection in the ice. In it, I saw both women, Mira and Saphra, mirrored in flame and frost, neither saint nor sinner. Just keepers of different halves of the same secret. I smiled. "Fire does not ask who it warms," I said aloud, and for the first time, I understood what it meant. Behind me, the frost cracked, and something beneath began to glow. Centuries later, the story of Valmere and Sethem lived only in fragments, like a fire that had burned too long and forgotten its shape. History never truly disappears, it just changes temperature. Some parts stay warm enough to hold, others cool into myth. I was not alive when the archaeologists found her name again, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel as if I am there, kneeling beside the dust. They were working in northern Egypt, at a dig site where the dunes had swallowed a city that once traded in glass and spices. They expected merchant ledgers, maybe temple lists. Instead, they found a chamber sealed with clay so fine it broke like breath. Inside, there were scrolls, so brittle that the air itself seemed to apologize for touching them. The texts were written in two languages, one northern, sharp and angular, one southern, flowing, curved like sand patterns after wind. At first, the team assumed it was coincidence, a trade record between distant peoples. Then one of the interns, pale, young, and shaking, noticed something. Both scripts carried the same hand. The writer had translated her own words, line by line, as if teaching one world to understand the other. They could read only fragments. Exchange of breath. Warmth that binds the living and the dead. The silence between flame and frost. But in the corner of one page, almost lost in the dust, there was a signature. The letters were faint, drawn in the style of the old northern tongue. Liana of Valmere. The lead archaeologist called for verification. Carbon dating confirmed the impossible. The scrolls were nearly 3,000 years old, older than either language was supposed to be. They found more evidence. Shards of glass that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, their hue shifting between blue and gold. The locals began to call it breathstone, though they couldn't have known the word's history. The stones were scattered throughout the site, buried like offerings around the ruins of what might once have been a temple. Scientists argued over it for years. Some said the glow came from ancient minerals reacting to the desert air. Others insisted it was contamination from modern excavation tools. But those who handled the shards said they could feel warmth inside them, even after midnight when the sand froze. Residual heat, explained the physicists. Human imagination, said the skeptics. Still, when night came, The researchers gathered their tents around the fragments, because the desert, however rationally studied, remains faithful to superstition. In one of the later scrolls, translated after months of effort, there was a passage almost poetic in its simplicity. The frost does not hate the fire. It waits for it. The sun does not envy the moon. It borrows her stillness. Beneath that, written faintly in another hand, were the words, "Remember, fire does not ask who it warms." The academics called it an epilogue, perhaps written by one of Liana's followers. I think it was her. When the news reached the world, it lasted only a week in the headlines. Ancient dual climate ritual discovered. The lost queen of Sedum? The public devoured the story, then moved on to the next catastrophe. But for a handful of historians, linguists, and dreamers, the discovery became a quiet obsession. They compared climate records, migration maps, patterns of myth. Everywhere they looked, they found echoes. In Siberian folklore, there is a tale of a woman who carried the sun in her pocket, giving light to the lost. In West African oral tradition, there is a hymn to the two-breath mother, who taught people to cool the earth after lightning storms. In medieval Europe, an anonymous manuscript speaks of a queen who balanced the warmth of kings with the patience of servants. All of them told the same story differently. Every civilization, it seemed, remembered someone who had tried to teach them balance, and every one of those civilizations had, eventually, forgotten her. That was the real lesson hiding in the dust. Not miracle, but memory. The archaeologists returned year after year. One of them, a young woman named Dr. Rhea Haddad, wrote in her field journal, "I think she is less legend and more equation. Heat and cold, power and mercy, rise and fall together." Maybe the ancients simply understood thermodynamics as ethics. Her note became famous among historians of science. Students quoted it in essays about energy and morality. But what struck me most was the second line she scribbled below, almost as an afterthought. "We do not inherit fire. We borrow it." I keep thinking about that sentence whenever I see the world lit by electric veins, cities glowing like constellations of controlled fire. Our modern age believes it has conquered warmth. We harness it, meter it, sell it by the kilowatt. We've made it obedient. But obedience is not the same as understanding. The systems that keep us alive, the grids, the pipelines, the engines, all rely on the same fragile pact that Valmere once did. Keep the embers alive. Share what you can. Hope the night doesn't come too soon. We've replaced the ashkeepers with technicians, the priests with policymakers. But the rules haven't changed. Those who control heat, literal or social, still decide who survives the winter. Entire nations still barter for warmth, gas for allegiance, electricity for silence. And when the systems fail, when blackouts roll across cities like eclipses, people huddle together again, rediscovering the ancient math of shared breath. I wonder if that's what Liana foresaw. Not prophecy, but pattern. I've seen the shard they found. The breathstone now kept under glass in a climate-controlled room in Cairo. It doesn't glow anymore, at least not to the instruments. But when I leaned close, breath fogging the display, I thought I saw the faintest pulse beneath the surface, a shimmer that might have been reflection or memory. The curator said, "It's inert. Just silica and impurities." I nodded. But in my chest, I felt the same warmth my ancestors must have felt crouched beside dying coals. It's never really gone. It just waits to be recognized. Sometimes I imagine what Liana would think if she saw our world. The air-conditioned towers, the solar grids, the heated floors. Would she see progress or a more sophisticated version of the same ritual? Would she smile at our arrogance or pity it? Maybe both. In every hospital, the warmth of a body decides its fate. In every negotiation, heat and cold still define the rhythm of survival. We live by thermostats and algorithms now. But we are still the same species that buried embers in ash and prayed they'd last the night. And though we no longer call it faith, we still believe that someone, somewhere, will keep the fire for us when we can't. There's a kind of mercy in that, flawed, fragile, human. When I left the museum that day, the Cairo sun was merciless. Heat radiated off the pavement in waves. I passed a street vendor roasting corn over a brazier, and for a moment, the scent of smoke carried me back through centuries. The same gesture, a hand tending flame. The same quiet defiance against the elements. I caught myself whispering my mother's prayer without meaning to. In through the nose, out through the heart. The words tasted ancient and familiar at once. The vendor looked up and smiled as if recognizing the rhythm. I smiled back. Fire does not ask who it warms. It only asks to be remembered. So tonight, as your room grows quiet and the blue light of the screen fades to a gentler glow, think of her, Liana of Valmere, the child of frost who carried warmth across empires, the woman who became both servant and queen. Think of Mira, her mother, kneeling by a dying hearth, whispering to embers as if to a child. Think of Safra, the queen who walked barefoot on marble that remembered heat. And think of all the hands that have passed warmth forward since, unseen, unrecorded, ordinary. We have always lived on borrowed fire. Every light we touch is an inheritance from someone who refused to let the dark finish its sentence. The names change, villager, scholar, engineer, but the gesture doesn't. One person bends toward another, shielding a small flame. That is civilization. A long chain of cupped palms. When I imagine Liana's last night, I don't see a grand ending. I see her kneeling on the frozen plain, breathing softly on the shard of glass the queen had given her, the frost hissing in protest. I see her reflection in the ice, two women overlapping, one made of ash, one of sun. And I hear her voice, quiet and certain. Fire does not ask who it warms. It's not just a line in a myth. It's instruction. It tells us that mercy isn't a choice, it's physics. Warmth travels naturally from one body to another. The only sin is interruption. The moment we decide who deserves it, we cool ourselves. That is why the story still matters. Because every system we build, every government, every faith, every economy, is only a more elaborate hearth. Some share the heat, others hoard it. The frost of neglect still waits outside, patient and endless. The archaeologists in Cairo have sealed her scrolls in climate-controlled silence, safe from decay. But the real preservation happens here, now, in your breath, in your attention. Stories are coals, not monuments. They must be revisited, stirred, spoken into warmth again. So when you finish reading, don't close this story like a book. Exhale it, pass it on. Someone nearby is cold. Look around you. The hum of the heater, the faint pulse of your phone, the thin thread of power that keeps the dark at bay. All of it is a modern echo of those ancient embers. You are surrounded by invisible keepers, strangers whose work you never see, maintaining the balance between frost and flame. You owe them nothing, and everything. Before you sleep, dim the lights a little further. Let the room settle into its own rhythm. The silence that follows isn't emptiness, it's the breath between worlds. You can almost hear the hum of an old hearth, the whisper of sand, the sigh of wind over ice. They are still speaking to each other across time. And if, for a heartbeat, you feel a warmth on your palm, don't question it. Just hold it steady. Someone, somewhere, is doing the same. Fire does not ask who it warms. It only asks that we remember.